Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Alchemy Lab. I am Matt. I will be your alchemist this evening, and I am here with author Andrew Piazza. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Matt. How are
It's
you doing
it.
today?
I'm doing real good. I'm doing really good. Didn't
Well,
realize that time had changed.
that's all right. I
It's
dedicated this entire day just to this endeavor. I got up extra early this morning. I went straight to the gym and exercised. I ate a lot of vegetables. This is all a lie. I did none of this, Matt. I got up late. It's Saturday. I went straight to a diner and I had a big fat American breakfast. So that's how we do it here. I don't know.
it's
Is the diner an American thing, or do you have that over there in the UK as well?
I think it's basically an American thing. Although we do
Yeah.
have I think our equivalent is like a greasy spoon, we call it.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah, it's just breakfast all day and all that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the go-to? I'll go first with the American version for me. It's scrambled eggs, it's bacon, as much I mean you can't have too much bacon. Bacon, hash browns shredded, not that awful sliced disc thing that never comes out right. Shredded hash
Mm.
browns, cooked a little crispy, and then rye toast. And on the rye toast with the little packets of jelly, got to be grape jelly or just go straight to hell. So
Okay, I
that's
hear you.
yeah. So what's the British version?
Oh, well, the full English, as
Okay,
we call it, is typically eggs, bacon, sausages, maybe,
okay,
baked beans. Um,
okay. We're gonna
so
talk about
that's
this in a second, but keep going.
yeah, that's our beans in tomatoey sauce stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's kind of and toast, of course. Toast.
yep,
That's like the staple, but you can
yeah.
add hash browns. You can add black pudding. You can
Okay,
add tomato, like a grilled
yeah.
tomato or fried mushrooms.
Oh,
All that
okay.
stuff is good. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I dated a British girl once and I was horrified to find out about the whole baked beans on toast
Hmm.
delicacy. That really threw me off. That sounded like something that one eats on like a hangover morning when there's nothing left and you're just going through the cupboards. You have to eat something or you're gonna die. And there's just a couple of slices of bread and a can of beans, and that's all you've got. But
It's one of the. It wouldn't surprise me if that's how it started. It seems like that's how a lot of food kind of comes into being. But so for people who don't know who you are, who are you,
okay.
and what do you do?
Well, I am an author. My day job is I work as a chiropractor. But really that's just to pay the bills to feed my addiction of writing novels. I love to write all kinds of novels, everything from comedy to horror to fantasy, uh, and everything in between. Yeah, the ones I think I'm best known for are probably the horror novels. Um, the best selling one that I've got is One Last Gasp, which is a cosmic horror novel set during
Hmm.
World War II. And there's another cosmic horror novel called The Song for the Void, which is set during the Opium Wars. Interestingly enough, that novel is actually in a fantasy contest called SBFBO,
Ooh.
Self-Publishing Fantasy Blog Off, and it's neck and neck for number one. So it's doing quite well, and I've been very, very grateful to see how well that's been received. Because technically, that's a fantasy contest, and this is a cosmic horror novel. But
Mm.
it seems to be received really well, and so I've been very, very happy to see how well that's been received.
Mm.
When they say that when one writes a novel, it's like telling a joke and then waiting a year to see if anyone laughs. And so
Okay. I
whenever
like
you
that.
write
Yeah.
a book and you put it out there, you're kind of like, is it gonna? I think it's great, I don't know. And then you wait and see what other people's reactions to it are. And
Mm.
especially with a song for the void, it's a little bit of a heavy lift emotionally, and it's genre, but it's also a little bit more on the literary side as well. So that can turn some people off if
Mm.
so you never really know how people are going to respond to it.
Mhm.
Anybody that picks up that book expecting like a creature feature of the week, very sort of genre work, is going to be kind of confused a little bit, I think, by what they're
Mm.
reading. because it's a little bit more unusual and unique than that.
Mm.
But it seems to have done very well, and I'm thrilled with it. I'm thrilled with it because I was kind of swinging for the fences with that one. And like I said, you always wonder. You always wonder what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly. Well, I mean, so you're an independent author then, right?
Yeah, yeah. So years ago, I sent things out and got back different levels of response from different places, and I just decided that with the advent of independent publishing back in 2011, 2012 is when it really started picking up with Amazon, and started off with that and then kind of refined it over the years. And it's been fantastic to do that because there's no longer any gatekeepers to keep authors from sharing their work. And it's very much becoming a bit of a revolution in the same way that podcasting has really taken over and is almost eliminated things like terrestrial radio, and is really heavily digging into a lot of classic television.
Mm.
A lot of YouTube channels and podcasts are they're getting better readership or viewership than a lot of television shows. So it's really quite extraordinary.
Yeah, I one thing I've heard from a lot of kind of podcasters and a lot of not so much on the author side, but definitely on the podcasting side, is that authenticity is becoming the new
Yeah.
thing that people are really looking for.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it seems like back in, say, like what they used to call the golden age of cinema, the 50s, the 60s, that this almost sense of mystique of not
Mm.
knowing who your stars were was kind of an important thing. And then now it seems more like people want that closer, more intimate relationship with their, I guess I'll call them content creators, to kind of catch everyone together.
Mm.
And just being able to see like who these people really are, rather than whatever branding they want to kind of put out there.
Mm. Well, I think that's also, I think that's true, and that's part of why there's starting to be a separation from the more sort of quote unquote mainstream. Is that who those people are
Mm-hmm.
so separated and so kind of alien and so
Mm-hmm.
detached from like me as just kind of a normal guy.
Right.
It
Yeah,
just
it's almost
makes
like
them like
it almost makes them seem superhuman and or not quite human, other than human, and that's off-putting. And it's it doesn't inspire one to get to know them a bit better or to attach themselves to that kind of art. For me, a lot of art is about trying to form a connection. A lot of the stuff that I write is about trying to form an emotional connection or evoke a certain emotion out of the reader. And so that's a rather intimate act. So no, you can't be phony with that. In fact, quite the opposite. You have to be vulnerable. One of my favorite pieces of advice that I've heard from various writing authors over the years, one was put yourself in danger. Take chances. Be vulnerable. Authenticity and honesty requires vulnerability. We all like to try to think of ourselves as these super cool, ultimately effective, omniscient creatures, omnipotent creatures, and the reality is we're terribly flawed and we're terribly limited. And to admit that and to expose oneself or expose one's own weaknesses or fallibilities or thoughts that might not be popular or whatever, what have you, is very dangerous, especially nowadays with cancel culture and all that sort of thing. But it's also how we form connections with other individuals. When you present something out there where like, oh, this is a way that I've felt and I wasn't happy about that, then other people can read that and say, yeah, I've been there too. And I think that's a very vital part of really any kind of art.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. My so so you being an indie author
Yeah.
is especially kind of interesting for me because I almost exclusive. I mean, so I've had maybe a couple of people who are kind of in the RPG sort of area.
Okay.
Have kind of come on but they're also in the novel space as well.
Okay.
Most of the people I invite on have been indie authors or
Okay.
content creators who just interest me. Like I just think let's just get interesting people and put them on a thing and ask them stuff, basically.
Okay. Well, I'll be the exception to the rule then. I'm terribly boring.
Well, I what and so part of why I sort of reached out is that I read A Song for the Void first. That's the first one I read.
Okay.
And then immediately got One Last Gasp. Like straight after, I was like, okay, I need more of this. This is great.
Okay.
And I look at, so we just had the Amazon page up, and it's got like it's something like 1,000 reviews on.
On
One Last Gasp. On One Last Gasp,
yeah,
and 350 odd on A Song for the Void.
And
as an indie author, I look at that and I go, how on earth did you do that? Like, I mean, obviously they're really good books, and
okay. So a lot of that involves promotions, like, and that's really the challenging part for me because I'm absolute garbage at it. I'm terrible at promoting myself. I grew up in a place that really discouraged drawing attention to oneself. Anybody that it is an area, Pennsylvania Dutch. You may have heard that term. I don't know, like the Amish, that sort of thing. That's I'm not Amish, but that a lot of that in that area, and that ethic is go to work really hard, shut up, do your thing, don't complain, don't brag, don't draw attention to yourself, and just keep plugging on. And for those people that would draw attention to themselves or would make a big deal of themselves, it's very frowned upon. People kind of look sideways at it, like, what's wrong with you, Mr. Big Shot? So any kind of stuff where I'm doing a lot of promotional work automatically feels foreign to me. It feels viscerally wrong. So I've had to kind of outsmart myself by reminding myself it's actually more arrogant and narcissistic to not promote yourself as an artist, because it almost implies that you're thinking, oh, well, everyone should just know about me just because.
Right.
Like people should just walk around and suddenly, like something got beamed into their head. Oh, I have to go check out this book. That they, you need to get out there and let people know that you exist. So for me, the most effective thing has been Facebook ads over the last few years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it goes in cycles. Like I'll start running some and they'll do quite well and I'll get all excited. And then they'll kind of drop off in effectiveness, algorithm changes. Actually, when I first started strongly using them in 2017, 2018, the UK was one of my strongest markets. Where I was just doing great with those ads. And then all of a sudden there was an algorithm change. And for whatever reason, that market dropped off for me as far as effectiveness of ads, where I could run them and I could get results, but not at a profit. So that's the real trick, especially with me. I don't have a huge backlist and I'm not an author that churns out a lot of material quickly. So it becomes much more challenging for me to advertise at a profit because the costs can often overrun what you actually will generate. But getting back to your question of how does one draw attention to it, that was probably the biggest engine. And I would say lately, then I've been also getting a boost from that contest that A Song for the Void is in. Is that I've had some individuals that would have read that. In fact, that's the entire point. That's a cool kind of contest that's run by an author named Mark Lawrence, who is a fantasy author who had some success and kind of reached back and wanted to draw some attention to independent authors that might not otherwise have gotten the attention. And so he started this contest a few years back, and it's 10 different blogs, and it's great. It's a lot of fun. I've got the opportunity to meet a lot of different authors via Discord and such, and expose the book to a bunch of people that would not otherwise have read it, which can be a good thing. It can be a bad thing. A part of marketing is targeting and making sure that you're sending out that information to the right audience.
Right.
You read A Song for the Void, so you have a sense of it's a fairly, like I said, it's kind of a heavy lift in a couple different ways. So someone who's looking for a cozy mystery with cats and or something
They'd
is
get a
probably
shock if
not
they
going to
read
like it.
if they
they're
read
not.
the
They're
Song
not.
of the Void.
They're going to make about 20 pages and be like, I don't understand why are they doing this? That's not going to go well.
Right.
So yeah, when you cast a wide net, you're going to get some negative feedback just from people who picked up the book because whatever that was in this contest. If you run like say you run a price promotion, say you set everything at 99 cents and put it out there, you're going to get people who buy your book just because hey, it's 99 cents. What
Right.
the hell? And they didn't even pay attention to what they just bought. So later they go to read it and they're like, why is this happening? So yeah, that's why I'm not a big fan of the discounted sale promotions for that reason, because I really want my readers to enjoy reading the book. So I want to make sure that the people that pick up my book are the kind that are most likely to enjoy it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So
I think
now are you working on an RPG yourself?
so. The point of this channel originally,
Yeah.
was to, and still is the point actually.
Okay.
we've like only just kind of gotten to the point. Um, my friend Lee has been
Uh-huh.
building the Alchemy RPG system, which is
Okay.
the two videos we just put out at the time of recording are
Okay.
sort of an explanation of some of the mechanics. And with, I don't know how much attention you pay to tabletop role playing in general.
Well, let me just interrupt you for a second because you happen to be talking to an old school OG D&D nerd.
Oh
So
boy.
I went into the magical closet of holding and I got some little bit of show and tell here. So we've got let's see here. Get these up in front of the camera. We've got old school player's handbook
Oh, that's lovely.
and Dungeon Master's Guide, and we've got
Yes.
the Monster Manual. I've got all kinds of crap here. This is my favorite cover right here on the Fiend Folio because it's kind of
Ooh.
like if Keith Richards decided to become a fantasy warlord or something, like that's what that looks like to me. But
Yeah.
I mean, oh,
Pretty
I'm
sure he's worn that on stage.
I'm terribly, terribly. I'm so old that I have the old original Ravenloft module. This is from
Ooh.
the 80s,
Mm.
including some Dragon magazines from the 80s as well.
Mm.
When Ravenloft first dropped on the scene, everyone went absolutely bananas for it.
Right.
Because there had never been really a module quite like that up to that point. That was the vampire monster in D&D was kind of like, yeah, it was there, and it was, if you ran into it, it was kind of like having a fist fight with a tough guy. It was just kind of like there. It's just another thing to fight.
Yeah.
And that module really turned it into this sort of mastermind guy in control of an entire castle and all kinds of things in it, and it had different ways of generating different storylines within it. It was a really brilliant concept, and they just did a fantastic job with it. So everybody's head popped off when it came out. But yeah, and then over time, they just started releasing all the weird books. Like, I mean, it got crazy with Oriental Adventures.
Ooh. Is that like a never-ending story dragon on the cover of that one?
It kind of looks like a luck dragon, right? Doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, and then like they like Monster Manual, the sequel and stuff like that. And they just kept churning them out, and we kept buying them because it was like, oh yeah, you gotta have that.
Yeah. Well, that's back in the day when it was interesting as well. And I guess was that around the Satanic Panic as well?
Oh, that was a little bit just before when I started getting into it, but that's when they started, like in the 80s, when they started oh my God, it's this sort of like satanic cult, which was just ridiculous. It made no sense to anybody. But yeah,
we did a video about that. We did a video about that with Patrice from A is for Alien.
Okay.
Because I heard about it and I was like, what is this? What do you mean?
Yeah, that's classic 80s just stupidity, though. I mean, like that was just, like someone started some soccer mom got a thought in her head and panicked and started making noise, and then it just became like everyone just kind of ran with it.
Mm.
And I guess some kid like killed himself or something, and
Yeah,
happened to play the game, and so everybody wanted to put that on it, and it was just dumb.
yeah. Yeah, I remember the story behind that. Yeah, and there was so much other stuff going on
Yeah,
than and like one like one facet was he played D&D, and it was
yeah,
0% of any of the reason why he would have
yeah,
actually killed
exactly.
himself. But
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And then, over time, as video games kind of got more and more sophisticated, they started catching more and more of that audience that was playing
mm,
tabletop role playing. Um, but it's still like there's still only so much you can do with that. I mean, tabletop role playing is so open-ended, and a big
mm,
part of the charm of that is the actual role playing aspect of it, that you get
yep.
to get together with a group of people and play this role and play off of each other, which you don't really get a whole lot of in a lot of the video game stuff. So that's
Well,
great that you're starting your own. I toyed with the idea. I have a series, an urban fantasy series called the Mage Hunters series, which is
mm,
basically like SWAT teams versus bad guy wizards. And I toyed with the idea of trying to create
mm,
a game around that, but I'm terribly, terribly lazy, so I just didn't do it.
mm.
So it's great that you're doing it.
Yeah, well, that's the thing with you mentioned the video games there, and things like Baldur's Gate and
Mm-hmm.
Dragon Age and all the and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And while they're great, there's always the wall that kind of you're always kind of boxed
Yeah.
into to what you're doing there. And like, I
Yeah.
think one of the great things that's happening with the more recent games,
Mm-hmm.
things like Solasta and
Skyrim had, was just enormous. You still had the limits, but it
yeah,
was so big that it took forever to find them.
mm,
So that was, but even they have some, open-ended ones
yeah,
where like, well, this one's a zombie game, a Daisy or something like that. That's,
yeah,
completely open-ended. There's no, well, it's just like, okay, there's a
mm,
sandbox, go play in it. But
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
you still run into limits to a certain extent.
to an extent, yeah. Well, the thing with Skyrim that makes it so, and sort of all the Elder Scrolls things that make them so kind of that they just have so many legs and they just keep going
Hmm.
is the modding. Like people can just mod
Yeah.
in new content
Yeah.
almost
It-
ad nauseum, and you just never stop.
yeah. Yeah. As soon as you think you're done with the game, someone will be like, wait, I just built a new section. Like, oh,
Right?
all
Yeah,
right. Now I gotta just do that now.
yeah. Well, there's one that's heavily based on 5e D&D 5e called Solasta, which
Okay.
has its own like dungeon maker within it, so you can basically make your own quest.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So there's walls within that, but like the amount of story you can generate is really something great, and I think more games need that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because well, a big part of any of this, whether it be fiction or whether it be video games or movies or whatever else, is immersion, right? You want to
Hmm.
suck people in and get them so invested in this fictional thing that they forget about the real world and they pay attention to the fictional world. And so that's all about immersion.
Mm.
Um, and so when you hit those walls, there goes your immersion. Like we've all, if you play video games, you've always played that game with like the weird physics glitch where
Hmm.
like you'll hit something and then like a body will fly through the air and somebody like, okay, well, I guess that happens,
Yeah.
So it's funny, but it kind of pulls you out of the immersion.
Hmm.
And similarly, if you're writing fiction, you want to make sure that the physics of your story is 100%, so that you don't have somebody reading that and saying, well, hang on, that doesn't make any sense. You don't want to write a
Mm.
story about Vikings and then somebody pulls out a revolver and starts shooting. It doesn't, people
Mm.
will be like, well,
Yeah,
I'm not a
the internal
historian, but I don't think that's the way
right.
that went.
Yeah, well, the internal logic is really you can have something entirely fantastical as long as
Yeah.
it's got its own internal logic. Then it's
Yes, absolutely. And for fantasy series, like Mage Hunters. So you have a magic system, and it's absolutely important that you keep that internally logical, so that there's rules and that I think it's also very important to have limitations.
Mhm.
so that people don't become so overpowered that they just become, cartoonish. Like, well, what's the point of this story even? No one's struggling.
Right.
So, but you keep that sort of internally logical, and it just becomes a new set of physics for the characters to interact inside of and solve problems inside of. But yeah, I think it's terribly important.
Well, it's something I ran into kind of early on because my first foray into writing was writing novels. It was a fantasy series,
Okay.
and the sort of one of the kind of roots of that story, or one of the kind of core ideas of it, was this group of warriors getting resurrected a century after they died.
Okay.
So immediately there, I had a thing of, okay, so these people were dead and they brought back to life. So how did that happen, and how can I make this interesting now? Because I've sort of implanted the idea with that route that death is not necessarily final.
Yes.
So how can we how
that's very important, because a lot of times when you have a mechanic where people can be brought back to life, it kills all the stakes. Because
immediately lowers
same thing with time travel, right? If you can just go back in time, so we made a mistake, big deal, let's just use the time thing and fix it all. So yeah, actually something similar with the Mage Hunter series that I have is that one of the first novel, one of the first things that's brought up is there's a whole technology that brings people back from the dead, but it's flawed, and they invariably end up going insane and becoming homicidal maniacs.
Oh, that's cool.
And so they start making they keep trying to perfect it, because there's going to be a lot of money in it if you can get that right. And they keep making the mistake of bringing these people back to life, especially those that have magical abilities. For some reason, those individuals become more powerful afterwards, after they're brought back. And so now they're homicidal and they're powerful. And so you need these special SWAT teams to come get them and put them away. So,
Nice.
that what we're discussing, that creating those limits became a plot point, became a major plot point, and a kind of a central theme behind the story.
Well, the way I dealt with it in that series, the finale of which I'm currently on the final chapter of.
Okay.
The way I dealt with that was, in order to bring someone back whole as they were, it requires a hell of a lot of time, a hell of a lot of power, and a hell of you need experienced people doing it. So it's something that requires just
massive investment.
So much investment and so many resources that it's kind of impractical to do.
Right.
And like necromancy and things exist, so you can bring back effectively zombies,
kind of alive people.
And there's another aspect as well. You can bring, so what the sort of central character is, the sort of soul of this dead guy put in a suit of armor, effectively. So he's basically a walking tank.
Yeah.
And you can do that, but it's not bringing back the person. It is, but it's not bringing back the person.
So instead of putting them into like an android body, you're essentially putting them into a suit of armor as their physical form.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. And is this the first book that you say is the final chapter, or has this been a series?
So that book, the first book I ever wrote, was the first book of this series. And I'm finally now on the final chapter of the final book of that series.
Oh, all right. How's that feeling?
It's a lot. Yeah. I mean, it feels like, I mean, obviously the editing process still has to happen, but it's like going through it's like I've come to the end of a very, very long journey, and I can see.
Yeah, it's like finishing a marathon, isn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy, and it's I've had to kind of really kind of zone in on it, so I don't, because I have creative ADD. I like, whenever I'm writing something, I'll get an idea for something else and go, "Ooh, that's interesting."
Oh, see, Matt, you're the only one. You're the only one that happens to.
the thing, like, if I get stuck, because this has happened a couple of, like, during the second book, I got stuck, and I was like, I feel like this story is about to go in a direction that I didn't intend, and I ended up writing a sci-fi novel.
Okay.
Like,
okay. Well,
a
sometimes you need
separate
to do
sci-fi.
that.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to do that because sometimes it will go in a direction that you didn't anticipate and you didn't want it to. And we can get into a little discussion here about pantsing versus, what do they call it? Pantsing versus plotting, or gardeners versus architects, or however you want to put it. People who plan out their novels ahead of time, as I tend to do. I tend to plan a lot out. Now, my version of doing that is I tell the story to myself over and over and over again in my head and go through different iterations of it. And then once I have a general idea, I'll start writing, and then I'll allow it to deviate somewhat, but I have an overall idea of what I want to do. Some people will kind of just let it go. My feeling on that is, if you do that, it's kind of like letting water go downhill. It's going to form a crooked path naturally. You may have heard people talk about, oh, the characters take over the story and they start writing the story for me. I don't think that's quite the best way to describe what's happening there. What's happening is you're getting the force of narrative logic determining what the next step is. So you have, as the characters become more developed, as the story becomes more developed, people have, if you have a character who tends to act a certain way, say violently, to a problem, and all of a sudden they encounter a problem, well, you obviously expect them to react violently to it. And if they were to do otherwise, it would seem strange to both the writer and the reader. So that kind of determines where that path is going to go, which way the river is going to go as it goes down the hill. And then the sum total of all that will tend to take it wherever it wants to go, versus where you might, as the artist, want to go, if you have a theme in mind, or if you have a particular ending in mind, or whatever. So it becomes trickier to direct that path. I liken it to, if you get into a stream with a heavy current, one in a canoe, you're going to throw your paddles overboard and just let it take you wherever you want to go, or you're going to keep your paddle. You're still going to current's going to take you downstream, but you can at least direct around the hazards and more or less end up where you want to end up. I prefer using the paddles. But the benefit to kind of throwing your paddles overboard is you will have a story that has twists and turns that are unexpected, because they're unexpected to the writer. So they're definitely going to be unexpected to the reader. But you can also paint yourself into a corner pretty easily. You can end up in a place where, like, oh shit, everyone's going to die. I got no way. I got no way out. I got no way out for these people. And then you're kind of in a place where you don't want to be. The danger of plotting out ahead of time, planning it out ahead of time, is that you might give it all away ahead of. You might let the reader know ahead of time what's going to happen, because you have to plant those seeds. If you want XYZ, if you want a helicopter to come and rescue everybody at the end, you have to have something there ahead of time that says, like, oh yeah, by the way, we've got this radio that you can call in and get a helicopter. And then, people can foresee that. But yeah, it's a constant tangle there. You got to walk that line.
I find, like, in a series, it's doing kind of the garden method of, like, not having the paddles, let's say, right? In a series, has what I've tended to do is keep one paddle, basically. Like, I plan book by book, really. I don't necessarily. I had the ending very early on. That's one thing I made sure I had. This is how it's going to end, or at least this is how the final confrontation is going to go. And the mechanics of that. So I'm like, okay, this is where we're going. Now we have to work out how we get in there, basically. And it really did take on some twists that I didn't necessarily see coming. Like, the point where I had to stop was a point where I went, is this the story I'm actually gonna? because it was the first books was almost set up as like a very kind of swashbuckling good versus evil.
Okay.
Like these are all the good guys and these are all the villains, and we're going to
Sort of
do that.
classic high fantasy.
Basically,
Yeah.
And I realized, sort of, I think 12 chapters into the second book, I realized, oh, that's not what I'm writing anymore.
Okay.
This has gotten a lot more. While I'm showing how kind of evil the evil people are, I'm also in a position where I'm showing that the good guys aren't perfect. Because
Okay.
I thought that was important to do.
Yeah.
And I had,
So you're leaning a little bit more now into what's sometimes called grimdark, where you have more moral gray areas with your fantasy characters.
kinda, but I wanted it to be. I came to the point where I was like, I kind of want this to be more optimistic. Like I didn't want it to just be grimdark. I wanted it to kind of. I wanted there to be a chance that it wasn't just going to end in massive kind of people getting kicked into the sea. I wanted to sort of bring it together in a way that was more. Because the thing about fantasy, we've kind of gotten into the escapism part of it. I didn't want it to be so grim because I wanted people to kind of just enjoy it.
Yeah, you want people to walk away with the correct emotional response to this kind of book. So if you present like, hey, this is a high fantasy, this is this is what you're going to get, people are going to kind of expect that a little bit more of an upbeat ending. It could be bittersweet maybe, but generally speaking, they want more of that upbeat, the good guys win, the bad guys lose, and everything is all well and good and peace in the valley kind of a thing. You can be a little bit grimmer in some genres and more optimistic in others. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There are genre expectations, and you throw those out the window at your own peril, because people generally don't like them. And as popular as subverting expectations became, at least starting about 10 years ago, it's very difficult to do. Very difficult to do properly, and most people can't. And there was a whole host of movies, books, whatever that came out that were just subverting expectations, and that's it. And it was just garbage.
See,
all it did was annoyed people.
Yeah, the moment you said subverting expectations, I had to pause because I was like,
yeah,
I had to sort of suppress
there's
the
so many
shudder and the groan of like, oh, because it's such a good. This comes back to logical consistency. You can subvert expectations as long as the expectation maybe that comes from genre.
Yeah.
You can subvert that and it still remains logically consistent. Like the Red Wedding is the big one.
Sure. And that's a great, Game of Thrones is a fantastic example, because it does, one of the things that made it so popular was that it subverted expectations, in that it was technically, at the time, the whole idea of grimdark was not really popular. And stuff like what Martin wrote wasn't really out there that much. And so you started reading that, and you get a certain sense of, your expectations are, Ned's the hero and he's going to win. And, it's everything's going to, and all of a sudden, half or 2/3 way through book one, his head's chopped off. You're like, what the that just happened? What?
Yeah.
And that was kind of the genius of it. And, a kid gets pushed out a window, and people are, just doing crazy things. And it's things that you're not expecting. But that was also done with a logic behind it of, we're going to tell a story about people vying for power, and it's going to be, there's going to be like I said, an internal logic to it. It's not just going to be done to poke somebody in the eye and be like, oh, you were expecting this? Well, me,
like every mistake matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, there's a huge difference between that, and I'll just throw out The Last Jedi. as just being,
Yep.
you know, I mean, I remember I went into that movie and I was laughing as I came out because I was just thinking to myself, I pity the poor bastard who has to write the next one, because
Yeah.
Ryan Johnson just basically took everything that had been made about Star Wars ever, crumpled it up in a ball, and sprayed diarrhea all over it, and was like, "See you later," and walked out the room. And
Mm.
so the next person is just going to be like, what am I supposed to do with this? You know, so yeah, that was just, if it would have been a different brand, it might not have been a bad story. You know,
Yeah.
like there's elements of it that are not terrible, and the overall story arc, you know, like, okay, but to take, you know, one of the most beloved, optimistic, heroic characters and turn him into an angry burnout, it's
Yeah.
just like, oh, geez, you know.
And it's I would say even it could have been a Star Wars movie, but just not in the series.
Yeah,
Like outside of that
sure,
series, it could have
different
been,
characters.
yeah,
Yes,
with different characters, it could have worked just fine.
yeah,
But as a part of that continuing story, it
yeah.
was just a
Did it's a
massive
massacre.
skid in the road, basically.
Yeah,
That movie
yeah.
is so weird. That movie is like a real inflection point in
Yes.
in Hollywood and attitude toward Hollywood, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of, and is it? Yeah, it's a good question of, as an inflection point. Is it was it just a canary in the coal mine, where it was kind of like the classic example of things have gotten so weird, it culminated in that, and that's just now kind of like the obvious example, and the everything else was going to happen anyway,
Mm.
but now we just have a really good example that
Yeah.
happened. Or did that one happen and everyone else goes, oh yeah, let's start trashing all these franchises, that sounds like a great idea.
I think what it was, I think it accelerated things. I think it
Mm-hmm.
was it was like the match tossed
Yeah,
into a pool of whatever. Like it just immediately, like Star Wars, obviously it's damaged Star Wars basically
right.
irreparably at this point. And then
Yeah.
Star Trek goes. And then
And
like
that hurt my feelings more, because I'm an old Next Generation nerd. I loved that
yeah.
series, and to see, I caught little bits and pieces of some of the newer ones, and really ever since the, is it Kurtzman? Is that his name? That started in
Hmm.
2010, 2011. Ever since his movie, it was just like, dude, what are we doing here? You know, like this
Yeah.
isn't even remotely on point. Like this is an individual who doesn't understand his product.
Mm.
You know, like the whole idea behind Star Trek is this cerebral, optimistic, hope for the future, exploration, a sense of wonder about the galaxy, all
Mm.
those great things, and to serve almost as a beacon to, this is what we could be. This is how good things could get if we get over our own stupid shit and
Hmm.
just move forward. And they just took it and went the opposite direction and started making everybody vicious and petty and vindictive and racist and all the things that they were supposed to have
Yeah.
gotten past.
Mm.
So it was just kind of like, oh well, I guess we'll just have, I guess Star Trek isn't Star Trek anymore. So yeah, that was
Yeah.
just ugh.
That was it. What that show did, I mean, it just absolutely, like, I grew up on Star Trek. I watched Star
Mm-hmm,
Trek with my dad. I still do when
mm-hmm.
I'm over there. And it raised it asks so many questions of you
Yeah,
as the watcher. And
yeah,
it's so it makes you think, like, okay, because it's timeless stories as well. Like
yeah.
the
They're
original series holds up today, I think,
Yeah,
because it
now, yeah, they're silly in that if you pay attention to the costumes, you pay attention to the whatever the sets,
yeah,
and the
there's the
fact that,
kitsch element to it.
yeah,
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 but
and the fact that Kirk fist fights like all powerful aliens for some
yeah.
reason, like just all that is okay. Get past that and remember that these are stories from the '60s. Like
Mm.
this is the gold. Nobody told stories like this before. That's what's so interesting about that era, is that these were now these are things that we're kind of like, yeah, whatever, you know,
Yeah.
because we've seen the later iterations of it, the version, you know, 2.0, 3.0, 5.0, of those same stories, but nobody told this story before. This was the first time, and it made everybody's head pop off, so yeah, it does still hold up. I still think of the story, what is it, The City at the Edge of Forever, where Kirk's gotta let this woman, who's this nice woman that he kind of has a thing for, he's got to let her die, otherwise the world changes again, because Hitler wins. It's the butterfly effect kind of a thing. And it's a great episode. And it's one of the ones where it's kind of like, yeah, nothing like that came out before.
There's always one, whenever I rewatch the series, which happens maybe like once a year or something like that, there's always going to be one episode that I missed, and that I watch and I think, how did I miss this? Like, this is, and I get something new every time I even watch episodes that I know and I like.
Yeah, well, because a lot of times the first time you watch it, you're so caught up in the story that some of the nuances will pass you by. And then getting into it, you have a bit of familiarity, so you have the chance to check out the little details that maybe you didn't notice before. But yeah, now which is your favorite of the Star Trek series?
Okay. I feel like, it depends which day of the week you ask me. You're asking me on a Saturday.
Right. Right.
And it also kind of depends on which one I've been thinking about the most recently. And it's probably going to be either the original Next Generation or Deep Space Nine.
Okay. Yeah, I usually tend towards the Next Generation. As we said, that with the original series, what's so impressive to me about that is that these are stories that have never been told before. And so the fact that they're groundbreaking, and the fact that nobody dared to do something like have a racially diverse bridge crew or anything like that. Like, this is, again, trying to appreciate the historical context of the early 60s and some of these stories that are being told. It's just like, these guys were taking chances.
Well, like at the time, especially, like, you're in the middle of the civil rights movement, and you've got a black woman on the bridge. You're in the middle of the Cold War. You've got a Russian guy on the bridge.
Right.
Yeah. You're like two decades after internment camps, and you've got a Japanese guy on the bridge.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing. And that again was kind of the power of that franchise, is to present what could be, that we can get past the silliness that's holding us back and become truly great as a species, go out to the stars. And the point of all that would be exploration and improving ourselves and leaving behind worries about material possessions or any of the other kind of silliness that we get caught up with.
Well, the other thing that made it so timeless, I think, is who you've got writing it, because you've got like very, very well established sci-fi writers at the time.
Yeah,
well, you had penning episodes of that show.
The episode I mentioned, "City at the Edge of Forever," was written. The original one was written by Harlan Ellison, who is one of my fiction heroes. And it's kind of funny. He wrote the episode he wrote was a little bit off brand. Like, his original script needed to be changed, and that would probably make some Harlan Ellison fans scream. But his episode was written a little bit. It was a little too harsh. Like, it kind of was a little bit outside of some of the ideals of the Star Trek universe. For example, in his version, the reason why they're beaming down to that planet is they're going to execute one of the crew for dealing drugs. So it was kind of like, that doesn't really fit with what we've got going on the Enterprise these days. In fact, none of that really fits. But so they had to change it a bit. But it was his original idea, that the basic story arc for it. He ended up suing him for some ungodly amount of money and won. But it's just an interesting side note that even some of the great authors sometimes need to have a really good editor to kind of reel them in and be like, well, you got a great idea here, but here's kind of where we're going with this idea. Yeah, and this stuff doesn't really fit.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like one of the ones that stands out for me, and it's one that I've seen so many times, but this is something I got from it the last time I watched it, It's the man trap, which was, I think, the third pilot or something, where
Okay.
with the salt monster that has the things on its fingers and it sucks your face and sucks all these salt out of your blood.
Okay. I don't
And
recall that one off the top of my head, but keep
it's
going.
it's one of the it's first season. It's one of the classic ones.
Okay.
And there's a point in it, and so one of the things it can do is it can like change its form. So
Okay.
it's how it kind of lures you in. Like it
Yeah.
changes form to someone you know, or someone, or like I think it like changes into like a sexy girl to get one of the red shirts,
Okay.
and it like hypnotizes you as well. And it changes form. It gets on the Enterprise somehow, and it changes form into bones.
Okay.
And there's a point where they're having this meeting to deal with this creature. Like, okay, how can we deal with this creature? We know it changes form. We know it does this, this, this. Him, as the creature as bones, is contributing to the meeting, and also like subtly arguing the case for its own existence.
Okay. Yeah.
Like it's not a threat. It's just it's just trying to survive, surely.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah,
we
which
just
is
leave it
great
alone,
because right. So we've seen that story since then, right? Version 2, 3, 4, 4. But had that story been told in the past in that way, where you had something that can fit in, but it's also, like you said, kind of sitting in with, okay, now I'm in with the enemy essentially, and I'm kind of like, well, hold on, guys, maybe he's okay, you know?
Well, the thing is, it's not even told that way now. Like I think about like analogous things like that. Some great films like Alien or The Thing, and I think to
Right,
myself, they would never do that in something like The Thing,
right, right.
because it's got to
Yeah,
be a monster.
right. Yeah, it has to be destroyed. Whereas Star Trek's a little bit more interested in exploring the possibilities of what could be, and where can we take this? Yeah, there's just so many great episodes. You know, for me, the Next Generation is the big one. You know, I think of so many episodes that were just, the one that pops to the top of my head is the one where Picard lives a whole life, and lives a whole fantasy life inside of a probe. Essentially, a probe makes him pass out and think that he's living on a planet that happens to be dying, and he lives a whole life and learns all about this culture as a consequence of being in this fantasy. And that was kind of the whole point of the probe, was that this culture knew it was dying, and the only way that they could preserve themselves was to launch this thing out there and essentially create a VR program that people would get sucked into and live through it and experience it, and that's the only way they could live on. And I thought that was just such a fantastic and beautiful episode, because it's so much of what people want out of their life. You know, we're all doomed. You know, we're all headed for the dirt at some point. And so, most people just want something out there to acknowledge that they were here, and that they were worth having around. And so I just thought that was a really strong episode on their part. That did exactly what science fiction and fantasy can do.
Well, it's the perfect POV character as well, because Picard is very much like the lonely at the top. I've got my career, that's it, it's fine. And it's put him in a situation where he's married, and he's starting a family. And I think he says in the episode, I never thought I needed kids to complete my life.
And there's a heartbreaking, talking about rewatching it, I remember on a subsequent viewing, there's a scene where he's talking with, I think, his daughter, because he's just playing with his grandkids, and he says something like, it breaks my heart to see them and know that they're never going to live a life, because he knows that the planet's dying. And this is this idea of, and this is actually the core theme, if you want to take it to another place, of Cormac McCarthy's The Road, which is this post-apocalyptic world that's dying, and here's this father with his son who's desperately trying to keep his son alive in this world that's going to hell, and he can't stop it, and he's almost powerless against it, and is just trying to struggle against the tide. So but that little short moment, with that one line, is just like, wow, that is pretty rough to deal with.
I mean, it's definitely one of the top ones in that, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
what I love Darmok as well, where he's on the
Yes, yes, where
yeah,
they can't communicate because one's speaking in metaphor. Is that the one?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah,
one.
that's it's just again, it's a fantastic episode because again, we're getting to like some very basic fundamental human needs, like just the
Mm,
ability to communicate. And once, if you can't communicate, there's this vast gulf between the two of you. And once you can, all of a sudden there's understanding and there's connection. And all of a sudden, someone who seems to be an enemy now no longer is an enemy and is now your friend.
mm,
Yeah, it's just an absolutely gorgeous episode, a
mm.
fantastic episode.
Yeah, I think it's the ending. He's got the perfect ending where he's
Mm,
communicating with the
yes,
crew using
yeah,
that language,
yeah,
and as an audience, we know what he's talking about.
yeah.
It's not just, it's like we've also kind of learned that language and that mode of speaking
Yeah,
along with
it's
the
a really
character.
well written episode.
Mm. At time of recording,
Yeah.
um, Picard season 3 is out.
Okay.
Now, I don't know how much you've heard about Picard season 3.
I saw bits and pieces on YouTube of 1 and 2, and I was really turned off. And then I saw
Yep.
little, like maybe like 2 or 3 clips of season 3, and it looked like maybe they had kind of turned a corner. But I have a very limited sample size.
Now, Sim, I watched, I think, the first episode of the first season and immediately got too angry to to watch anymore because they just broke. They had sort of broken everything. It
Yeah,
seemed.
yeah.
Season 3, I kept hearing that it was good from people who
Uh-huh.
had seen all of it, and I
Okay.
was like, okay, well, I'll give it an episode and see how it is. And I don't know. The big problem they're having, I think, is getting people to give it a chance because
Okay.
it's
Well, because they already
so
shit the
much
bed
damage
for
has
two
been done.
seasons.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I'm halfway through it now. I think the 5th episode just aired,
Okay.
um, and it's so far kind of good,
Okay.
which is
What I
shocking to
saw of
me.
it, yeah, what I saw of it again, it seems like, unfortunately, again, getting back to ruining or subverting expectations, the character of Picard had changed so much
Mm,
in that series. It was just kind of like,
yeah.
Picard was one of my fictional heroes growing up. Like this was the guy. Like there were times when I would ask myself, all right, what would Picard do?
Hmm.
Like he just stood out as this paragon of ethics, morals, but also discipline and uh, doing the right thing, doing the proper thing, and standing up for what was right.
Hmm.
And this sort of unflappable, unshaking attitude that he wouldn't back down off of what was right. And a very capable individual.
Hmm.
In fact, he represents the best of us.
Yeah.
And so, what I saw of the series, there was this sort of weak, apologetic,
Yeah.
feeble, kind of like, kind of guy. It was like, that's about as far from Picard as I can imagine a character
Mm,
getting.
yeah.
And so it just kind of hurt my feelings. Like this was the kind of guy who would take charge. This is the kind of guy who, like people were intimidated by him, not because he was violent, not because he was abusive, but because he was uncompromising and he was brilliant in his ability to explain how you just fucked up, for
Yeah.
lack of a better term, and set you right, or set himself, like he would make mistakes from time to time because he might get frustrated or tired or not have all the information. But as soon as it became clear to him, like, oh, hold on, I made a misstep, he immediately changed course and was like, you know what? No, this is the way things ought to be. I need to be better, and would set things right.
Mm.
And the way that they just have him seem to do it in this new series is just to be this sort of, I'm so sorry, I'm here.
Yeah,
Like,
he's very doddery. I mean, part of it is because he's in his, I think he must be in his 80s by now.
yeah, the
Patrick Stewart.
actor, and as much as I love Patrick Stewart as an actor. I mean, God, I remember seeing him all the way back in Excalibur and the original Dune, and just being like, "Who the hell is this guy? He's pretty awesome." And then he came on Next Generation. I was like, "Oh, this is going to be interesting," and he just owned it. Yeah, as great as he is, there's a certain point I think at which it becomes difficult to bring that kind of thunder and fire.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think the thing is more identifiably Picard in season 3 than he was in 1 or 2.
Okay.
But I mean, it's far from perfect. I mean, it's still got that baggage of being part of that series, so it's still having to deal with some of the stuff that's set up.
Okay. It looks like they discarded a lot of the characters.
Yes, they did.
There's kind of like
there's only
like
one of them left.
Right, and almost like they're kind of pretending like, let's just say 1 and 2 didn't happen, and we'll just move on from there.
I feel like they are kind of doing that. Yeah. If the problem is like they discarded all the characters except one, but the one they kept is like the worst one.
Ah, of course.
And I'm just like, why keep her?
Of course, yeah.
But it's yeah. It's certainly very, very flawed. And the quality is picking up now.
Okay.
I think like the 4th and 5th episodes they brought it up.
Okay, good. Well, that's good to hear that somebody at least came along and talked some sense into somebody. It does seem to be that downslide that we were talking about that started with The Last Jedi, or was at least heralded by The Last Jedi, seems, I think, to be at least a little course correcting. I think that there's a little bit of like an eye rolling that now happens when audiences see like an obvious pandering or whatever you want to call it, where people are just kind of like, all right, let's not do this anymore. Let's start making some fun. I'm watching The Last of Us right now, the HBO series, and I'm about, I think, 5 episodes in, and I'm really liking it. I think it's well done, really well done, post-apocalyptic zombie fiction. I think that it's hard. There's some minor flaws, but they're very minor. If I'll give an example, like I think Pedro Pascal is a fantastic actor, and he crushes this role. I think the only problem that I could think of with him is that his accent comes and goes, because he's supposed to be from Texas. And so 1 second he's from Texas with the accent, 1 second he's really not. And then he goes back. And it's too bad, because I've seen him. He's in another movie called Prospect, which is like a little low budget indie sci-fi movie, which is like space Western kind of a thing. And he talks with essentially a Southern Texan type accent through the whole thing. So he can do it. I'm not sure why it doesn't happen in this show, but other than that, man, I'm really, really enjoying it. I think it's just really well done.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a game property, and it's a property that never should have been a game.
Okay, I'm not familiar with the game either. I had heard of it, and I had heard that people loved it. I never played it. I just knew that it had really, really strong reviews, and everybody seemed to be very impressed by it, but I had no knowledge of it. So going into the show, I didn't have any preconceived notions as to who was what or which or where.
Yeah, I mean the game, the main reason the game, I think, was so well regarded is the story behind it, rather than the game itself, because the game itself is fairly kind of generic as a game would be, but it's got these 2 central characters of Joel and Ellie, who their kind of bond really is what elevates it up to something so memorable.
Right. So it's almost like it started off as a novel or a movie, and then we're like, oh, let's make it into a game.
I mean, it may be. I mean, I don't know.
That's actually from what I understand or what I heard, that's how The Expanse came about. I think it was originally designed as a game concept, and then as they were developing it, they turned it into a script or a series of novels that then became, I could be wrong, I could be terribly wrong, but that ended up, I thought that was a pretty strong property as well. The Expanse, I thought, was really well done science fiction. It has, again, had its flaws, but overall, a pretty strong contender in that field.
Yeah, I watched the first series of The Expanse. And some of the second, I can't remember why I stopped watching it, but I think it got out of the routine.
Okay. Yeah, at a certain point, it becomes a little repetitive. I think maybe past season 3 is when they kind of you start to feel like, well, wait a minute, I feel like we're going backwards. Like we're telling the same story that we told in season 2 and season 3 over again. But yeah, the first few seasons are pretty strong, and I enjoyed that they kind of sat down. We were talking earlier about the physics of a fictional world, and that they bothered to try to figure out, okay, what would space combat look like 100 years out? So no laser beams or shields, or they have G-forces, and that has real effects on people, and they use percussion weapons and missiles, and what would those actually do, and the distances involved. And so I was kind of impressed that they bothered to kind of sit down and try to figure all that out.
Yeah, it's very grounded in science, in practical science, which is, and I think people maybe get the impression that having it so grounded in that would make it more dull, but it really doesn't. Like there's plenty of excitement and plenty of
yeah, absolutely. In fact, the more that you can inject reality into the fantastic, the more believable the fantastic becomes. I mean, that's something that made Stephen King, that's part of his genius, is that he's so easily able to create these settings of these small towns populated with characters that feel very real, because they're people that have real problems, everyday problems, and they've got complications of like, oh, this person that they have to work with is an asshole, and this relative is always causing trouble for them, or and as you're going through, like, you recognize these different characters, like, oh yeah, I know a guy just like that. And so because that feels so real, when the crazy mythological thing or fantasy thing shows up, that feels real. So getting back to, I guess, to my novels, that's something I try to do with especially with One Last Gasp. I think is probably more obvious, because there's a much longer time frame until you start seeing the fantasy elements, start seeing the horror elements. Very much the first third of the book is almost a straight up World War II genre action story. And it was designed to be that way. When I sat down to write that, I thought to myself, okay, let me see if I can mash up a World War II, like a genre World War II story, with a cosmic horror story. And it was going to be, the first third's going to be almost all World War II, very, very slowly introducing that stuff. The middle third will be mostly horror. And then the last third will be, we're just going to mix it all up in a giant salad and see what we get. And so what that did was, and cosmic horror was a really good fit for that for a number of reasons. But one of the reasons is cosmic horror works best as a slow burn. So we get very, very slow introductions to this, just hints of something being a little off or something being a little wrong. And then as we go further, we start to see it more, and it snowballs and it snowballs and it snowballs. And you really only start getting a good look at the bad thing towards the end, because once you get a good look at it, it's no longer mysterious. And so it's no longer that scary.
Well, I was about to use that whole thing as a segue into your work, and you did it, and that's great. So what is it about cosmic horror that spoke to you the most, that kind of made you want to write it?
Yeah, the shortest version is that I enjoy it. I enjoy reading it, I enjoy writing it. But past that, cosmic horror really has, first off, it for me, it's the horror that lies beneath all other horror. So if you're going to write a horror story, if you're going to try to scare somebody, you're getting to what scares people. I think that cosmic horror is kind of the base horror that other fears are living on top of. So if we're scared of dying, why are we scared of dying? So we're scared of oblivion, right? We're scared of no longer existing. We're scared of not being important or not being relevant. And since
Mm.
cosmic horror is the horror of being this tiny and insignificant creature in this vast and uncaring universe, it kind of underlies that sense of, well, what if it means nothing? Or what if I'm meaningless? Or what if I'm powerless? What if I'm just a leaf on this? We like to think of ourselves as being these powerful beings, these omnipotent beings, but then something comes along and slaps us across the face, and it becomes like, oh, hold on, I'm totally not in control.
Right.
There's forces out there far beyond even my ability to understand what they are, much less control them. And that sense of not understanding the nature of the universe, even like, oh, I thought I had figured out how things work. Turns out they're nothing like the way they are.
Yeah.
And so it gives the writer an opportunity to pursue themes that really are existential in nature and start to ask questions about the nature of reality or the nature of life or the nature of existence, that we're getting back to trying to form an emotional bond with people, trying to evoke certain emotions out of people, that sense of sometimes helplessness or hopelessness or being lost or being confused or being scared. It can really tie into that. In this sense, in the case of One Last Gasp, the example that I usually use is I did a ton of research on World War II for that, which was not difficult because I'm a huge history addict. So one of the things that came up a lot was the description of these soldiers as they went to combat and how they changed. And so the way that they described it essentially boils down to, they would show up, they're young, they're cocky, they're invincible. They're like, nothing's going to happen to me. I'm too young. I'm too good looking. I'm too great. I'm too awesome. And then they get out into this very unforgiving environment and they start seeing people dropping dead. And they start saying, well, it could have, I mean, it's possible, but I'm too well trained. I'm too well equipped. I've got my friends around me, so I'll be okay. And then they see more of the bad stuff and they finally start to say to themselves, not only can it happen to me, it's going to happen to me because I'm nothing special. And so that progression really kind of plugs into that cosmic horror aspect of being out of control in this great, uncaring, out of control universe.
Well, I must say, you picked one of the perfect environments in One Last Gasp to do that. Like one of the perfect sort of World War II kind of battles, the Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah. It was, I actually went back and forth with a lot of different, where I wanted to place that conflict. And so that was the one that eventually won out. And part of the reason was, as I was doing research on that and the fighting in that area, it was very interesting. As gigantic of a battle as it is, and it's the biggest battle ever fought by the U.S. Army. It's along a front. It's a massive distance long. There's I think something close like 2 million men involved. It's insane. It's just gigantic. But when you read the accounts of the fights, it's almost like a series of small engagements all along that front. So it almost reads like, rather than a giant mass battle where you have these huge formations slamming into each other, it's a group of little skirmishes almost a lot of times. And in the pines of the Ardennes forest, they would talk about it, the pines being so close and covered with snow that it was almost like reading about Vietnam jungle fighting, where the enemy might be 20 yards away and you'd never know it. And if you so much as bumped the snow off of a bough of the tree, that they would know you were there and they just machine gun the area. So it created a sense of isolation, which is what you really need a lot of times for horror.
And the impending shelling death, which is going to happen at any time.
Yeah, that was another big part of, if you read, well, you can also watch Band of Brothers, which is a fantastic miniseries, great book and a fantastic miniseries. And they show pretty well during that sequence in Bastogne, when the 101st is stuck in Bastogne, and they just are enduring constant shelling that is just unbelievable and very difficult to try to appreciate what that would have been like.
It's one of the things that I really enjoyed in both One Last Gasp and Song for the Void is that the time period you pick is tied in with the theme that you're going for and tied in with the creeping threat as well.
Yes,
like the Opium Wars in Song for the Void. There is
it was really important to have that the theme for A Song for the Void, dealing with existentialism versus nihilism, and to some extent an exploration of addiction and individuality, and even the idea that personality and individuality is essentially an addiction to your own narrative, your own story that you tell yourself, fit in pretty nicely to that Opium War setting, because you have access to a highly addictive substance, and isolation on the ship as well. And then this creature that's really a creature of the mind. It's not a thing that you wrestle with. It's something that affects your mind. And so you have to engage with it on that level. It's a really important, I take a lot of time to try to make sure that matches up quite right. And sometimes it's creating that theme is during that process of matching those two aspects of the story, matching them together, you start to be like, oh, this is kind of what I'm talking about. And as much as I talked about planning out stories, I was probably 2/3 of the way through A Song for the Void before it finally clicked into my head. Oh, this is why it had to be the doctor that's the main character. It had to be written in first person. It had to be in the Opium Wars, and it had to go exactly the way it goes, because it finally clicked. Something I've been putting kind of almost subconsciously throughout the book is like, oh, this is the Dark Stars thing. That, okay, now I get what, because I was writing it and I was kind of like, sometimes I feel like the Dark Star is kind of shooting itself in the foot, like it's doing some stuff that doesn't quite make sense. And I couldn't, but I knew it was right. I didn't know why it was right. And then I finally got to the point where I was like, oh, now I know why. And so everything kind of made sense at that point as to why those elements had to be what they are.
Well, it's dealing with as well that sort of that kind of more so in One Last Gasp, about like war camaraderie and that conflict camaraderie between men in that position where they are like they're forced together. And it's I remember, I mean, A Song for the Void is, for a lot of it, is so claustrophobic because you're in this steamer, and you're in the bowels of this steamer, and things are happening, and you like describe where most of the crew are just in these hammocks, like
they're on top of each other like bees in a hive. They're just piled on top of each other.
And then when things are kicking off, and when it's just like worming its way through, it's just so, and you don't know who you can trust. Well, the doctor doesn't know who he can trust. Can he trust the captain even? Like it's got that great element of just suspense that goes all through. Well, thank you.
That's something that I really worked hard to try to make sure that was throughout as much as possible throughout the novel. Once things started taking hold, once the horrific elements started taking hold, because a lot of it had to do with questioning reality, and then who, not only who can you even trust yourself? At one point the doctor does self-harm to himself because he's kind of starting to slip under the influence of this thing, doesn't realize it quite yet, and something random pulls him out of it. But at some point you start to question reality, and, well, can I trust? Is this thing that I think is a thing, is it really a thing? Is it really there? Or is it something different? Which again starts to really tie into the theme of nihilism versus existentialism, and the nature of reality, and what's real and what's not real. How much of our personality is just a construct? How much is malleable by disease or injury or whatever might come along that might completely change who we think we are? And what are those implications? One of the things that, if you really want to freak yourself out, read a lot about the effects of disease or injury on the brain and what that does to a person's personality, something that we all kind of take as being a given. And I might even mention it. I might mention it in the Song for the Void. But there's a famous case, Phineas Cage, I think is the name of the guy. It's a railway worker in the American West in, I think, late 1800s, takes a railway spike through the eye socket. There's an explosion, and a full-on railway spike, big old thing, goes through his head, through the eye socket and out the top of his head. And everyone thinks, oh, he's dead, but he lives. They manage to get it out. He doesn't die. And he has a massive personality change. He went from being this very reserved, what they call a God-fearing man who, you know, wouldn't curse or, you know, anything like that, didn't drink, very, very strict guy, to being this swearing like a pirate, drinking, gambling, whoring kind of lunatic after this injury. And it was because of the damage to his prefrontal cortex, which is an area of the brain just right behind the forehead here, that is responsible for things like social interaction, restraint. A lot of it's restraint or discipline, not doing the dumb thing. And so people that have a lot of brain injuries to that area will suddenly have a large personality change, in which they become very reckless and socially inappropriate. And people around will be like, well, how comes they're a jerk now? Well, it's because of an injury. It's not because of a conscious choice. And so that, of course, raises questions about how in control of us are we? Or is who we are completely out of our control? And what does that mean? And that's a kind of a scary, frightening thing. And that's one of the sort of feelings and emotions I was trying to tap into with the Song for the Void.
Well, it's one of those things that certainly as I've gotten older, I've noticed. I used to be very much like, I trust my brain, I'm fine. But the older I get and the more I learn about stuff, more like what affects your brain, it's like, okay, I trust my brain, but also I need to maybe be aware of what's been poking it, because everything is poking it.
Yeah. The limitations of all of us, you know, we want to think that we'll never get sick, we'll never get tired, we'll never get depressed, we'll never get frustrated, that we can just keep grinding, you know, and we'll stay at that same level of cool and calm and productive. And it's simply not true. You know, a lot of times we are massively under the influence of things around us. And that can be a little scary, you know, that can be something that we don't really want to admit about ourselves, that we are not these rational computers that always do the smartest thing, that we're often at the whims of various chemicals floating through our brain that are pushing us one way or another, and are making our very judgment change so that we don't even think it's a strange thing to think.
Right. So, and we might have influenced that by what we ate for breakfast.
Yeah. Something as simple as that. I mean, another big one right now in healthcare is the effects of the microbiome, which is the microorganisms living in your intestines that aid in digestion, but they have a surprising influence even on behavior. So there's some talk about that, depending upon which of these particular bugs is starting to get into the largest population, that they may start to push you towards, oh, maybe I'll have that pint of Haagen-Dazs versus the thing of broccoli, you know, and that can then, and it just seems to you walking around like, no, I want ice cream because it's yum and delicious, when you're really just being pushed in that direction by an external, or well, internal in this case, force.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is once you go down that road, it just you're like, uh-oh, this is bad.
Yeah, it gets really scary. It can get very strange, and you really have to kind of sit back and try to wrestle with coming to terms with it. There's fMRI studies, which I will pronounce properly, that show that individuals making a decision consciously, like, okay, pick this one or pick this one, that the decision is made before the person is consciously aware of the decision that they're making. So that means that the decision is being made subconsciously, and then your conscious mind catches up and essentially tells you a little story as to why you picked the one you did. You know, oh, why'd you pick that one? Oh, because it's blue, and blue is my favorite color, or whatever. But you had already made that choice before you were even aware that you made the choice, and then you kind of just caught up and explained it to yourself.
Right.
So that's another one where you're kind of like, that's really creepy, and that's really weird, and how much of me and how much of what I do is really under my control.
Right.
So yeah,
and what influenced that choice? Like,
exactly.
What thing? Like this, the idea of like being directed is something that is, again, in A Song for the Void is like the main. It's like you're being you're just being poked in this direction.
Yep.
Here. There you go. I'm just going to poke you this way, and now you're doing
some things
horrific.
You might not otherwise have done.
Yeah. So, and that kind of brings like the suspense in the book is like really punctuated by the horror, like the very like visceral horror.
Yeah.
Which is just, I mean, when they catch up with the junk. That's
okay. Yeah. The burn ship.
Yeah.
So that was a really fun chapter to write. But a lot of that, they really slam up against seeing a lot of that up close and personal, and seeing the effects of people who, in the case of those on the junk, those that have completely dissociated themselves from any sense of being inside their own body. So here's another fun one that can happen to people. There's a malady where people can get the sense that one of their limbs is not them. So they'll feel like this arm is not their arm. And even if you point to it and say, but look, it's attached to you. Like there it goes. They go, well, yeah, I see that it's attached, but it's not me. Like they, in their head, it's almost as if it's a prosthetic. So if it got chopped off, they might even feel the pain, but they wouldn't have the emotional connection of, oh my God, I just lost my arm. You know, it would be like, that's just like taking my belt off or something. It doesn't mean anything to them. So removing all of that from an individual, what then does that person start to look like? And then what kind of actions are they willing to take? If it starts to become, if you and I were in a video game and we were the NPCs and we suddenly became aware of that, how would that change our behavior? And what would we start to be willing to do? Like how little would we care about what happens to us, what happens to them, what happens to anybody, and what kind of actions might they then start to take?
Right. It's real food for thought. I think that's part of what really grips me about cosmic horror. It's like fear. It's not just fear of the unknown; it's fear of the unknowable.
Yeah, because it's a lot of times with cosmic horror, you don't walk away with a perfect understanding of what you just ran up against. A lot of times you encounter it, you get a sense of what kind of sort of what it is, or kind of sort of what it can do, but you don't really know, and you get away from it, and you're still kind of stuck with wrestling with trying to sort out, well, what did I just bump into, and what does that mean for me? And that's a lot of life, isn't it? Like every now and again, we'll bump up against something so far outside of our normal experience, range of experience, that it really throws us for a loop. And we're stuck kind of sitting there thinking like, oh, you know, like what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my life? What does that mean for what I think about life and the world? And so trying to capture that essence in a bottle and then making the reader feel it is a big part of what you try to do with cosmic horror.
Like I remember I think I was ill a few months ago, and I was writing, because that's what I do when I need to do something. Let's just write some stuff.
Right.
And I put a video on to give me some background noise. And it was a video about infinity, about like the concept of it and the discovery of it. And the people who discovered infinity, or discovered the concept of infinity, a lot of them went insane after discovering it.
Yeah,
because it's just the enormity of this thing.
Yes.
I that video I think it was about 40 minutes long, and I think it broke my fever because I was thinking about it too much and like sweating.
It
Like,
kicked you right out of right out of your illness.
yeah, it was too gripping and it was too terrifying. And
Yeah.
I was oh, okay.
So yeah, back to the point that you were making about matching theme and setting. So one of the reasons why A Song for the Void is set during the Opium Wars, this is the mid 1800s. So this is a period of time in which ideas of the Enlightenment are really starting to come to fruition with the modern industrial era.
Yes.
So, and this is where we have Darwin and his seminal work. This is when you have Nietzsche saying things like God is dead. What he means by that is we don't need God anymore. Like, we don't need the supernatural to explain the world. Up to that point, the way that people explain the world was with this supernatural version of, well, it's because God wants it that way, or the gods want it that way, if you go back further. And then now we have science coming up along where we have a mechanistic view, where we don't need the supernatural anymore. We have a mechanism to explain how all this works. And so what that created was this great void of, well, what am I supposed to feel about me then? Because up to that point, the supernatural version of the world had human beings being these special, almost quasi-angelic creatures of great intellect and with a soul that would live forever. And then when you suddenly start to put mechanisms to explain everything and take all that away, it leaves a gap that the church or religion used to fill, and now it's not there. And I don't think it's ever really been filled. There's still people who kind of wrestle with that to this day. Some of the aspects of life that the church used to fill for people hasn't really been filled by anything else yet. And so people are kind of casting around trying to figure out what to do with that. And so that really kicked off in that period of the 1800s. And during the course of that novel, individuals are coming to terms with this sense of, well, if I'm just a meat puppet, whose strings are getting pulled, what's the purpose of anything? And struggling with what the implications of that are. So they're essentially a microcosm for what humanity was dealing with as a whole at that time.
And as such, it's the perfect setting for something like this.
Yeah,
for cosmic horror.
Yeah, it fit really, really well.
Right. Yeah. So what's next?
Well, I'm writing 2 different works right now. I don't usually go into too much detail about works in progress, but one is another cosmic horror novel, also in a historical setting. So I'm going to do another one of those. And then I'm also working on another urban fantasy, which is a spin-off sort of the Mage Hunters series in the kind of like that same universe. So I'm working on 2 of those kind of in tandem, and it kind of sort of depends on which one's yelling at me more, or has become more clear to me what needs to happen next. So yeah, plugging away on that.
All right. Can you give away the time period it's set in?
I'm not going to give that away yet. No, because that's going to be, I think it's going to be part of the fun of the surprise of launching it. Is for people who, I think that when people who are familiar with my work see that, they're going to go, okay, this could be interesting. I'm hoping that's their reaction. I hope that's their reaction. So, but I'm going to have to keep that under my hat for now.
Nice. Excellent. Yeah, leave me in suspense. All right, fantastic. Okay, well, I think that is...
Oh, we've been at this for quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to kind of wrap up there.
Okay, right, yeah, fantastic.
So where can people find you, get in touch with you?
Sure. The easiest thing for anybody that's interested in kind of sampling my work, if they don't know if they want to pick up a book yet, is to just go to my website. That's andrewpiazza.com. There's a little link there that you can get a couple of free short stories, including the prequel to One Last Gasp, which is called Flying Fortress, and it's a cosmic horror novel that's set on a B-17 bomber. So, had you read that one, Matt?
I have not read Flying Fortress. I've only just okay.
If you enjoyed One Last Gasp, you might enjoy that, because it tells the story in One Last Gasp, they mention at one point some B-17 formation. A few of the bombers disappear out of formation, and then one of them makes it back. And that's how Wexler, that character, is aware of a little bit of what's going on at the Manor House. And so he kind of mentions it offhand. And at one point, I just decided I really wanted to tell the story of that doomed B-17 mission and what happened on it. And so that's the story of Flying Fortress. So that gives a pretty good sense of what One Last Gasp is like. If someone wants to read it for free, it's downloadable. And there's a few other short stories that will come along with that. So they can do that. They can always go on Amazon and check out the books there as well. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram under my name. So yeah, they can always check that out too.
Fantastic, and I definitely recommend it because the particularly those two books, the ones I've read, have both been chef's kiss. They've been absolutely brilliant. So
thank you very much.
Yeah. You can obviously you can find me here on YouTube, but also at Waterhouse Author on Minds, also on Instagram and Facebook. Although I'm only just really saying that now. Not said that before.
I'm terrible at Instagram. I'm so bad at it. I really need to put more effort into it.
Same. Absolutely same. But Minds is probably the best place to get in touch with me. So take care, everybody. And I'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Always welcome.